Hi, junior high, it's Bailey. Welcome to our final week of Waitlisted, where we've been talking about waiting and waiting and waiting. Here is the number of days that I'm counting down until a special day this year 291. Can anyone guess what I'm counting down to? What I'm waiting for? No? It's my birthday! I'm counting down to my birthday, which is in November, by the way. Maybe it's weird to start counting down to my birthday this early. So tell me, when do you start counting down to a big event like Christmas or your birthday? Is it a month, a few months, the week of? When you're excitedly waiting for something like Christmas morning or your birthday to arrive, the waiting can be painful. But do you know what's even more painful? Waiting while you're fighting with the people you live with. Our conversation today isn't really about Christmas or birthdays, but here's what it is about: family, fights, waiting, getting sick of waiting, and wanting to give up. But before we get into what we're going to talk about today, here is the first question for you to discuss in your group. You can either answer one or the other. First, are you counting down the days to anything exciting right now? If so, what is it? And second, are you counting down the days until the end of something you want to end, like school, a big project? If so, what is it? Take a few minutes and talk about those questions. Last week, we were talking a lot about waiting, and not just waiting for events like birthdays. We've talked about waiting during really difficult periods. We said that while you're waiting, God is faithful. And while you're waiting, God is listening. But let's be honest, sometimes when we've been waiting and waiting and waiting, we just get tired. Sometimes it feels like everyone is against us, like we're trying so hard to hold some really heavy things and no one is offering to help. Sometimes we just want to give up. There were times where I felt like I wanted to give up when I was in college. And there have been many moments where I was so busy with work, school, volunteering, and other things that I would get so stressed and frustrated. Sometimes I would have to work really late into the night on assignments, and sometimes it felt like I was the only one working and I was all alone. I was so busy that even though I was around people all the time, I felt alone and just like I was doing my own thing. And sometimes I felt like I wanted to give up. There are so many reasons why we might want to give up hope. Maybe you've been trying so hard, but nothing seems to change. Maybe you've tried to make wise choices, but the people around you don't seem to support you. Maybe your family is a mess and doesn't seem to be getting better. Especially when we feel alone, unsupported, or even abandoned by others, it's not always easy to believe that we can keep going when we've already spent so much time waiting. Here's another question for you to talk about in your group. Have you ever wanted to give up on something, but you persevered instead? What helped you to keep going? There's someone in Scripture, or the Bible, who understands this. His name is Joseph, and he's a pretty important figure in the Old Testament of the Bible. The Old Testament is the half of the Bible that was written before Jesus was alive. Now, Joseph's story is found in Genesis chapter 37, and I'm just going to read through it and kind of paraphrase for you guys. So, Joseph's story begins when he's 17 years old. He was tending to the flocks of his brothers, but he went to his dad and gave a bad report about his brothers, said they weren't doing their job right. Now, Joseph's dad, Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. And so he had this beautiful robe made for Joseph. And this made his brothers so jealous, and they hated Joseph. They couldn't say a single kind word about him. Then Joseph had a couple dreams. In the first dream, Joseph and his 11 brothers were in a field working with grain, and then suddenly Joseph's stack of grain stood right up tall, and all of the brothers' stacks of grain bowed down to it. The brothers, when they heard Joseph tell them this, were like, "Do you intend to reign over us? Are you actually going to rule us?" And his brothers hated him even more. Then Joseph had another dream, and he went and told his brothers about that too. He dreamed that the sun and moon and 11 stars were all bowing down to him. Now, Joseph was his dad's favorite son, and it was pretty obvious. Jacob loved Joseph so much that he gave him a special coat and special treatment. You can imagine how awkward that made things between Joseph and his brothers. And to make things even more awkward, God began speaking to Joseph in his dreams, letting Joseph know that he would one day rule the nation and rule over his brothers. Instead of keeping this info to himself, Joseph shared it with his brothers, which made things awkward. Instead of taking the hint that his brothers didn't appreciate being told that one day Joseph would be their boss, he continued to tell his brothers about these visions from God. Of course, things got even more tense. Now, one day Joseph was sent to check on his brothers and their flock. And when Joseph's brothers saw him in the distance, they plotted to kill him. They said to each other, "Let's just kill him. We can say that he was attacked by animals." But one of Joseph's brothers, named Reuben, piped up and he tried to save Joseph's life. He said, "No, we don't have to kill him. Let's just throw him in this well in the wilderness." So when Joseph came up to his brothers, they tore off his robe and threw him into the well. The brothers sat around the well for a little bit longer, and then some travelers came by. They had camels with spices, balms, and myrrh, which is like perfume, and they were on their way down to Egypt. Now Judah, one of the brothers, had the idea to sell Joseph to these travelers as a slave. So when the travelers came close enough to the brothers, they made a deal and sold Joseph to them. So, to recap, when Joseph's brothers finally had enough of hearing Joseph talk about how awesome he was, they decided to get rid of him. At first, they planned to kill him, but one of the brothers convinced the others to spare his life and sell him into slavery instead. I mean, I guess that's an improvement from murder, but let's not imagine this brother's a hero or anything. Can you imagine what Joseph must have been experiencing when he realized how much his own family hated him while he's sitting there in the well? When he realized he'd been thrown into a foreign country where he knew nobody, while he traveled with the travelers waiting to find out where he'd end up and how he'd be treated when he got there. That's enough uncertainty and loneliness to make most people give up hope. But that's not even the end of Joseph's misfortunes. This part comes from chapter 39. So when Joseph arrived in Egypt, God gave Joseph a ton of incredible opportunities. Things seemed to be looking up, but then a few more things happened. So here's how it goes. Joseph was working for a man named Potiphar. He was working really hard, getting along well with him, and starting to make good out of a bad situation. Potiphar was captain of the Egyptian guard, so he was fairly high up in the ranks. Potiphar realized that God was with Joseph and that Joseph succeeded at everything he did. So he put him in charge of everything in his household. Here's what happened next. Potiphar's wife started wanting to have a relationship with Joseph, and she asked him to be with her. But Joseph refused. He knew it wasn't right for him to be with her because she was married. And there was one day where Joseph and Potiphar's wife were in the same room together, and she grabbed his cloak and tried to kiss him. But Joseph didn't want any part of that, and he ran away. Now, while he was running, a piece of his cloak was torn off. And when Potiphar's wife realized that Joseph wasn't going to change his mind, she lied and told her husband that Joseph was the one that had asked for them to be together and tried to kiss her. She even used the piece of Joseph's cloak as evidence against him. Even though Joseph did nothing wrong, Potiphar was angry and Joseph was thrown into jail. Just when things were beginning to look up for Joseph, he faced a new set of difficulties. Can you imagine what he must have been experiencing when he was being preyed upon by powerful people, when he had no one to turn to, when he was abandoned by the people he thought were his allies, when he realized he was going to be thrown in jail unjustly? Once again, it's enough to make most people give up hope. And this isn't even the end of Joseph's misfortunes. Let's see what he does next. This is still in chapter 39. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those that were in the prison, and he made Joseph responsible for all that was done there. The Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Now Joseph continued to live in that prison for years, forgotten by the Pharaoh and his own family. And later on, he even had a chance to be freed, but his opportunity was lost when, once again, Joseph was forgotten. Now, I won't tell you how the story ends for two reasons. One, because you can read it yourself in the book of Genesis, and two, because that's not the point of our conversation today. Today, we're talking about what to do when you're sitting in the dark, waiting for help, looking for hope, uncertain about your future. When Joseph was in this position, he had every reason to give up and lose hope, but he didn't. Even though everything seemed to be going wrong, and Joseph wasn't sure if he'd ever make it out of prison, or if God would ever fulfill that promise of making Joseph the ruler of a nation, Joseph knew God was still with him. While he was waiting, God had a plan, God was faithful, God was listening. In all that time, God never gave up on Joseph, so Joseph never gave up on God. And if you're waiting on God right now, don't give up, because God's not giving up on you either. You might be thinking, this sounds good, but how? How do I not give up? How do I find hope when things feel hopeless? How do I hang on when I feel like I'm all alone? I've got 5 ideas here for you. Number 1, talk to God and don't stop. And don't stop talking to God. Tell God how you feel and what you're experiencing. Then ask Him for help to hold on. Number 2, talk to other people. Joseph may have been abandoned and alone, but you're not, even if you feel that way sometimes. On top of your friends and family, CircleYouth is filled with people who you can talk to, your leaders and your friends around you, and even me. So if you're overwhelmed or feeling hopeless, let's talk about it. We're here to walk through it with you. Number 3, remember, God is stronger than you think. When Joseph was in that well, he never could have guessed the opportunities God would give him in Egypt. When he was in prison, he had no idea what God had in store for his future. When he was betrayed by his brothers, he couldn't have anticipated the way that God would one day restore their relationship. God did all of those things and more. And that's the same God who's telling you right now not to give up. God is stronger than you think. Number 4, remember you're stronger than you think. You're wonderfully created by a God who designed you on purpose. You are strong, capable, and resilient. And when your strength fails, and sometimes it will, remember that in your weakness, God is strong on your behalf. And last, number 5, choose hope. Hope isn't just something that happens to us. In many ways, it's something that we can choose. We can choose. We choose hope when we fill our minds with what's good and true. We choose hope when we choose to talk about our struggles rather than trying to handle them alone. We choose hope when we tell God how much we need hope. We choose hope when we decide not to give up, no matter what. Here are a couple more questions you can talk about in your group. When you heard Joseph's story, what's something that stood out to you or surprised you, and why? And another question that you can answer, are you facing any situations right now that make you want to give up? Would anyone like to tell us more? Take a few minutes in your group and chat about it, and when you come back, we'll wrap things up. close out this series, I hope that you find hope in the stories we've shared about a few people from the Bible who waited on God. Paul and Silas remind us that while we're waiting, God is faithful. And Joseph reminds us that while we're waiting, we can't give up because God's not giving up on us. So now, no matter what you're waiting for right now, keep going because God's not finished yet. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye, everyone.